opened in Nabinway with a funny story about pre-Alzheimer's that I'm assuming that I have because I can't find anything or remember anything. But here I think, Nadia Bolz-Weber says that the job of the speaker is to throw herself under the bus, and then everybody goes, oh, yeah, I feel like that too sometimes. So I'm going to do that here. So, for whatever reason, this message has been hard, which is ridiculous because love is pretty easy to talk about, right? And I really haven't had any desire to really do it. And Devin was over last night with his fiance, and he said, how's your message coming? I said, oh, it's pretty rough. And he said, isn't it tomorrow? Yeah. And I would go to work on it, and I would start playing Family Feud on my phone, which is ridiculous, isn't it? But I found that God comes through. And everybody says, well, God comes through when you're faithful. Well, I have to admit that I really haven't even been faithful, and God has come through. So I'm just really thankful, really thankful. So today we're going to continue along with what Pastor Tim talked about last week, which is loving unconditionally, right? Which I like to call real love. So, and if I'm redundant, because I haven't heard what Pastor Tim had talked about last week, I apologize, but it must mean that you need to hear it twice. So, I have 6 points about what real love is and what real love isn't. So, number 1, real love is more than a feeling. Real love is a decision. And that's the reason why we have these things, because I'm going to give you a little lesson about the brain, okay? So, right in the front of our forehead, or behind our forehead, is something that's called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the logical, slow, methodical, analytical part of our brain. This is where we want our decisions to come from. And when I teach it to elementary kids, I show the wise old owl. I said, this part of our brain is the wise old owl part of our brain. And if this is the only part of our brain that we would have, we would all be like Sheldon Cooper on Big Bang Theory, right? But God's given us more than the amygdala also, but we're going to talk about just these two. There's also a part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is where our emotions come from. Our sadness, our excitement, our lust, our depression, our anger, okay? When the amygdala is calm, when things are going along pretty well, there is pathways that go back and forth between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Now that's ideal, all right? When the amygdala gets agitated, get really angry, or really frustrated, or really lustful, or really sad, or really depressed, what happens is it breaks off that passageway to the prefrontal cortex. And then our decisions are all made on an emotional level. And if you're anything like me, when decisions are made from the emotional part of the brain, you get yourself in a whole lot of trouble because emotions wear off. And then you're faced with the reality. So the first thing that I want to tell you today is that real love is much, much more than a feeling. Real love is a decision. Number 2, real love isn't exclusive. Real love should be about connection. When we begin labeling people, us versus them, Republicans, Democrats, Christians, non-Christians, gay, straight, Americans, Muslims, what we do with that label is we begin the separation process. We shouldn't be doing that. We should not be bringing a bar everywhere we go and asking people to measure up to our standards. But instead, we should be bringing a mirror and make a connection. Let me tell you a story about Father Gregory Boyle. He is a Jesuit priest who has worked with the gangs, and I know I've talked about him before, in inner city Los Angeles. And it was a Saturday afternoon. He had just gotten done with a funeral, and he had a baptism at 1 o'clock. It was about 25 to 1. He was in his office. He was checking his email, checking his mail. And not a little girl, a girl named Lisa, she was about 35 years old, came into the door, and she was in trouble. He knew her. He had seen her on the streets plenty of times. She was a heroin addict, but she had never come for help before. And she walked in the door and she said, "I need help." And he looked at the clock and it was 20 to 1. And she went on to tell her story. She said, "I graduated from Christian elementary school. I even graduated from Christian high school. In fact, the day of my graduation is the first time I tried heroin." There's the Alzheimer kicking in. As she continued with her story, he looked at the clock and it was 10 to 1. She said, "No one wants me. I call my family, they don't want anything to do with me anymore. My friends won't take me in." He looked at the clock and it was 5 to 1. She said, "I am ashamed and I am a disgrace." And he said her shame met his because when she stepped into his office, the only thing he saw was an interruption. So, we don't bring a bar and ask people to measure up to our standards. We take a mirror and we look in it together and we say, "Your shame is my shame, and your truth is my truth." So number 2, real love isn't exclusive. Real love is trying to make those connections. Number 3, real love isn't lip service. Real love is action, just like Samaritan's purse showed us today. When I think of that, I think of Peter, right after the crucifixion, who not 36 hours earlier had professed his undying love to Jesus, didn't he? And then Jesus was crucified, and someone walked by and said, "Hey, you were with Jesus." "No, I wasn't." Sure, I think I saw you there." "Nope, wasn't me." "No, I'm positive that was you." "Nope, it wasn't." See, it's really easy to lip service love. But when it begins to cost us our time, our reputation, our money, our energy, our favorite TV show, we suddenly begin to put labels on people. So then we can excuse ourselves from the action. See, we think that if it's good or true or right or pure, that because we know that, that's enough. But it's not, because I know that it's good and true and pure and right for me not to drink several Mountain Dews every day. I know that. And more often than not, I still do it. We all know it's good and true and right and pure to exercise. All of us know that. And how often do we do that? So knowledge isn't enough. Lip service isn't enough. See, our intentions and our actions never line up as perfectly as we would like. Even Paul in the Bible says, "I do the things I don't want to do, and the things that I know I should do, I don't do." But without action, church, all the kind intentions that we have are just a way of entertaining ourselves. So number 3, real love isn't lip service. Real love is action. And with action, you have to practice it. You really do. You have to practice it. Number 4, real love isn't purchasing. I'll explain that in a bit. Real love is giving. Oftentimes when we give with an ulterior motive. Whether it's because we want ourselves to look better, whether we want the boss to think highly of us, whether we want to have a favor in somebody's pocket that we can pull out when we need it. But if we really examine our motives, for the most part, we always want something in return when we give. And that's not giving, that's purchasing. If you think about it, if you think about the last time you gave and you didn't get a thank you, no one really cared, and it didn't make a difference, we get frustrated, don't we? We get frustrated. So when we give with ulterior motives, we're just putting it on layaway. We're purchasing something that is to our benefit at a later date. In my office, I have a sign on my computer that says, "Examine my motives every day, because with selfish ambition becomes evil of every kind." And that's paraphrased. I don't even know what verse it is, and I don't know where it's found in the Bible. But I try to look at that every day, because selfish ambitions are so easily rose up in us if we're honest with ourselves. So, number 4, real love is not a purchase. It's a gift. Number 5, real love isn't excellence plus ego. Real love is brokenness plus honesty. You know, the saying has gone for years, cleanliness is next to godliness. And I think in America we've changed that now to excellence is next to godliness. Because excellence is honored, it's esteemed. And the funny thing is that it's a good character to have. But what happens with us as humans is that we take the very thing that God has given us to show love, and we get our ego, which means edging God out, along with excellence. And pretty soon the reason that we had for showing love becomes secondary, and the excellence in the ego becomes the primary. Think about it. That happened to me Friday at work. There was a little boy that I hadn't seen in a couple weeks. I saw him in the hall and I thought, I need to get a chance to see him today. He's in a bad place. I knew he'd been in a bad place for a while. But I wanted to get my testing done. I wanted to cross something off my list and make me feel productive. It's really hard to measure when you meet with people. It's really easy to cross off got testing done off your list. And as I went about the day, I saw him in the office. This little boy is never in the office. And I thought, he really is in trouble today. I need to see him. But I went in my office and I got busy with packing up the tests. Got it all done. Got some high fives from my administration for such a great job on the testing. Went home that night, sitting on the couch about 8 o'clock, and his name came to my mind. I was ashamed. See, I had chosen excellence and ego over the very reason why I am in that school. It's my mission. So excellence plus ego equals self-righteousness. And brokenness and honesty equals grace. And the last one. What real love isn't? Judgmental. And what it is? Compassion and grace. I'm going to tell you 3 stories about judgment. The first one I think I've shared before, so I'm going to just tighten it up a little bit, but I think it's a story worth retelling. The gentleman who wrote The Shack, I don't remember his name, but he spoke on Mackinac Island several years ago, and I wasn't privy to be in person, but a friend of mine was, and said, you have to listen to this tape, it's fabulous. And I listened to it, and it blew me away. I think I've listened to it 30 times, and then I gave it away, and I can't find it. I'd give anything to have it back. He talked about his dad. His dad was a missionary, His dad believed very strongly that when he did the work of God, God would take care of the rest of his life, including his children. And so while his dad would leave every day and go out and do mission, the tribe that they were with sexually abused him for years and years and years. Needless to say, him and his father did not have a good relationship. Fast forward about 30 years, and his niece was date raped at college. And his niece came to him and talked about his father, which would be her grandfather, and said, I don't know how I would ever have gone through this without Grandpa. He was wonderful. He was my anchor. He was my rock. And he said, it dawned on me that this is the way we are. We're all a mixed bag. You, me, full of darkness and light. And all we need to do is focus on the light. Never forgotten that. Focus on the light. The other thing that I think about when I think of judgment and I think of compassion is this, Proverbs 27:7. He who is full hates honey, but to the hungry even what is bitter tastes sweet. You know, my cup is full right now in my life. It really is. You know, I have a warm, safe, secure home. I have food of any kind and flavor that I'd like in my refrigerator and freezer. I have a husband who loves me and adores me. I have children who honor me. I have a job that I love. My cup is full. It really is. And it makes it much easier not to choose those bitter things when your cup is full. But there was a time in my life when my cup wasn't full, and maybe yours isn't right now. And that's okay, because there's ebbs and flows of life. But when I was a single mother with 4 kids, living on $30 a week for groceries, and no support, it wasn't quite so easy not to go after what was bitter. So, you know, we need a kind of compassion that can stand in awe of what people carry instead of standing in judgment for how they carry it. Because it's really easy. It would be so easy for me, with my cup full, to judge some of those people. But that's where, one reason, one place where God does work through me, because I do stand in awe. You know, I have kids come into my office every day that I am in awe. Their teachers are frustrated, the administration is frustrated, and I get that because they're with them every day. But when you know their story, I am in awe that they're even in school. Because if I carried what they carried, I wouldn't get out of bed that day. So we need a compassion that stands in awe of what people carry, instead of in judgment of how they carry it. In my last story, and I think I've shared this book when I was worship leader several weeks ago, but it's a story that I want to share that's about judgment. And it's by Eric Cretan. It's resilience. He's a Navy SEAL plus a Rhodes Scholar. What a wonderful combination. He's got some insight and some things that none of us can, just simply because of his experience. So, and I was going to paraphrase it, but I thought, you know what? He says it so wonderfully that I'm just going to read it to you. Imagine a great runner. She is fast and agile. When she runs, her heart pumps, her legs turn, her arms glide, and her feet strike the ground so smoothly and cleanly that she seems to fly through the air. Now imagine that on the day of an important race, after years of diligent practice and successful competition, she blasts out of the blocks, sprints to the front of the pack, establishes a commanding lead, and then crashes like a sack of potatoes on the track. The other runners pass her. She stumbles to regain her footing. She finishes last. Is she a bad runner? Of course not. She simply had a bad race. Today, in a culture that should know enough to be forgiving of human weakness, we often fail to remember that people are not great all the time. People practice greatness. They perform with greatness. People practice courage. They perform with courage. And then one day, they don't. This does not make them cowards. It makes them human. I want to end with a verse, or part of a verse, from a Christmas carol called O Holy Night. It says, "Long lived the world in sin and error pining, till he appears and the soul feels its worth." Now, I know that song was talking about Jesus, but isn't that your job description, and your job description and mine? That we appear with our real love, and their soul feels their worth. Let's pray. Lord,